Can DCS help me learn to fly in real life? And I'm learning to fly, should I stop playing DCS and play Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 instead? I am asked these two questions all the time by community members, and the answer might be a little more nuanced and a little different than you might think. Hey guys, Spud here, as always, and this has been a video I have been thinking about making for quite a while now, and I'm sure there'll be lots of passionate opinions in the comment section of this video. We're going to be limiting our scope of today's discussion to those seeking a PPL or private pilot's license through instrument and commercial ratings and certs. We are not talking about airline nor actual military training in this video. As an airline pilot, I am still an active CFII or Certified Flight Instructor Instrument, and I did most of my time building as a full-time CFII, as well as a bunch of competitive aerobatics and aerobatic instruction as well. As a Part 61 CFI, I shepherded many students through their PPL, instrument rating, and commercial certification from many different backgrounds and many different ages. From teenagers wanting to launch into an aviation career to middle-aged men and women who wanted to start a new hobby and jump into the amazing and beautiful world of aviation. Intermixed into all of these different types of students, I had 4 students that were big PC gamers and big fans of flight simulators. 2 of these were avid Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 players, while the other 2 were die-hard DCS World players, with one of them being a rather competitive DCS multiplayer pilot. In this video, I'll not be sharing any names, and none of them, save for an aerobatic student, knew that I was a DCS World content creator while I was instructing them on how to fly airplanes in real life. However, from my point of view as their instructor, it was very interesting to compare and contrast their development as pilots in real life to those who had never used any flight simulator products prior to starting their training. So the short answer here to the question, can flying in DCS World help me learn to fly in real life? Is definitely a yes. Yes, it can. However, the reasons behind why may be a little different than you'd think. First, we of course have to address the elephant in the room that I'm sure you guys are all thinking of. Obviously, you will not be getting your private pilot's license in an FA-18C Hornet or F-14B Tomcat or any other fighter that are so beautifully modeled in DCS World. But you will be getting your PPL in a Cessna 172 or a Piper Cherokee, among other options, which of course are modeled in Microsoft Flight Simulator. So obviously, flying an MSFS is the best option, right? I would actually counter with no. It actually isn't the best option, because it really doesn't matter what you fly in a home, consumer-level flight sim. In fact, flying the type of aircraft you'll be training in without strict guidelines and a syllabus can actually lead to expectation bias and even negative training. I would have to rate my 2 students who were die-hard DCS players as the 2 best students I ever had as a CFI, bar none, and by a wide margin. And I would like to delve deep into why DCS World is such a fantastic tool for prospective pilots in real life. So let's break it down into a few different areas. Situational awareness, intuitive flying skills and energy management, instrument scan, and communication. All of these different skill sets build on top of each other and intermesh with each other to become some of the most fundamental skills a pilot requires, and are some of the most difficult skills for a pilot in initial real-life training to develop. You'll also notice that none of what we talk about today has anything to do with what type of aircraft you are flying in your home cockpit. Your CFI will always teach you how to properly operate your particular aircraft and its onboard systems. So let's go ahead and start with situational awareness, one of the hardest skills to develop as a pilot being thrown into the very unfamiliar world of aviation. The definition of situational awareness is the perception of elements in the environment within a volume of time and space, the comprehension of their meaning, and the projection of their status in the near future. People always tell me when talking about this subject, SPUD, PPL, instrument, and commercial students aren't learning to dogfight, engage in BVR fights, drop bombs, or use a targeting pod. And to that, I always say, well, of course they aren't. But the C in DCS, for Digital Combat Simulator, is precisely why it is a fantastic tool for building up a prospective pilot's understanding of situational awareness. In DCS, you're already in the aviation environment, flying an aircraft with stick, throttle, and rudder inputs, trying to maintain a speed and altitude, navigating, trying not to run into a mountain, all the things that will be expected of you in real-life flight training. But added on top of that is the combat element. Where's my wingman? Where are the good guys? Where's the MiGs? Uh-oh, that SAM site just shot at me. I don't want to fly into that other SAM site's WES. My target is here. I need to get my targeting pod onto it, and now I need to drop my bombs on it. And a million other dynamic variables all happening in real time that you need to keep track of around your aircraft. Situational awareness cannot be taught. It must be practiced, internalized, and honed by the individual pilot. All of the above aspects of building and maintaining situational awareness in DCS can translate directly to new students learning to fly in real life. Both of my students, who are DCS World players, on day one of their PPL training, could track other traffic around their aircraft and mentally plot where they will be and if they were a threat to us or not. Understand and keep track of the location of Bravo airspace shelves, rather similar to a SAM site WES. Navigate via pilotage and moving map displays. Communicate with ATC and other pilots at a very basic level, all while being taught how to physically fly the airplane with their hand on the yoke or stick, feet on the rudders, and a hand on the throttle and prop levers, all within the very chaotic ballet that is the airspace around San Diego. Their situational awareness and multitasking skills within the aviation environment were astounding and blew my mind as a CFI, with both of them even interrupting my teaching at times to ask about things way outside of what was happening within their own aircraft, which meant to me that they were thinking about everything that was going on around them, not just what's happening in the cockpit right now. While there was still a ton of work to do to get them ready for a check ride, they both had an amazing grasp on skills that takes many initial training students hundreds of hours to master, far beyond their PPL check ride. Next up, we have intuitive flying skills and energy management. And this is where I really see the largest divergence between Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 and DCS World players who are learning to fly in real life. Microsoft 2020 is all about flying and flying beautiful aircraft over faraway lands. DCS World is all about flying and flying beautiful airplanes and then dropping bombs on faraway lands. In DCS World, flying and flying skills are an extremely important part and are the bedrock to allow you to engage in all that DCS World has to offer. After you master the flying, flying becomes secondary, and flying good and not sucking is just expected because now your main job is to get a JDAM onto a target, to protect a strike flight from enemy MiGs, or tussle with a SAM site as a wild weasel. Your flying skills in DCS must be so good that they become innate. The jet becomes a part of you, and putting the jet where it needs to be, when it needs to be there, becomes second nature. Because you don't have time to think about it when there's a MiG on your 6, or you're weaseling an SA-11 down on the deck. Because of the combat aspect of DCS and the resulting competitive nature of the game, players dig deep into an understanding of aerodynamics, the cause and effect of parasitic versus induced drag, on-speed AOA, the region of reverse command, what a unit of angle of attack is, kinetic versus potential versus chemical energy, how to fly in formation, how to look cool for screenshots, flying an overhead pattern at home plate, and many, many others. Funny enough, I have found that most hardcore DCS Hornet and Tomcat pilots know how to fly a holding pattern without really even knowing what a holding pattern is, because they have worked so hard to master Case 1, 2, and 3 procedures to land on an aircraft carrier, one of the most basic aspects of DCS World. Unlike Microsoft Flight Simulator, DCS World requires that players have an extensive knowledge of the science of aviation just to access the very bare-bones basics of what makes DCS great, which then pairs with the art of aviation as DCS players fly beautifully detailed flight models with weight, inertia, and quirky flying characteristics taken into account, unlike the weightless, inertialess, and bouncy models of Microsoft Flight Simulator. I have found that a prospective flight student that can master the DCS F-14 Tomcat is far more mentally prepared for the challenges of flying an airplane in real life than anyone with countless hours in Microsoft Flight Simulator. However, like DCS, when it comes to real-life flying, even in a Cessna 172, a real small airplane, the flying of the airplane is secondary. You are expected in flight training to fly good and not suck, and that's the easy part. The hard part is everything else you're expected to do while flying that airplane. Keep track of airspace, traffic, navigating, communicating, systems and engine monitoring, and many, many others. For a CFI, deciding whether a student is ready to solo, the deciding factor usually isn't that student's flying skills, but rather are those skills now so innate, so ingrained, that they have the mental bandwidth to deal with any curveballs that might be thrown their way, such as the airport being closed due to an aircraft with a blown tire on the runway, while the student is in the pattern for their first 3 solo bounces of their career. And, as we all know, a mission in DCS World is nothing but curveballs. And my 2 students in real life were ready and looking for those curveballs, those threats, and potential issues, and asking about them early on in their flight training journey. A good instrument scan can trap and then rectify many threats and errors in the cockpit of an aircraft, and serves as the fundamental basics of instrument flying when getting your IFR rating, and is a basic skill used by Sunday pilots to fighter pilots to airline pilots every time they fly. While it is introduced in PPL training and hammered on in instrument training, it can be a very hard skill to learn. It is yet another layer on top of everything we've already talked about. A pilot must look at all of his or her instruments, understand what they are telling them, internalize it, and understand how it affects their aircraft in the overall aviation environment and situational awareness picture without fixating on one in particular. And the pilot's flying skills must be so finely tuned that they can fly the aircraft with no outside references. Again, this is where my DCS World fan students shone high above the rest of my students, and I again attribute this to the combat aspect of DCS World. We all know that now and in the past, Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020's weather system is far superior to that in DCS World. But the mere simulation of instrument meteorological conditions is not what primes DCS World fans for a fantastic in-real-life instrument scan. But rather, it's the massive multitasking that occurs within the cockpit of a DCS World player's aircraft. DCS World players are very used to scanning across multiple parts of the cockpit, taking in information from various different and complex systems while also scanning outside of the cockpit as well. Outside of the cockpit is something that a lot of people coming out of instrument training tend to forget about. For example, a DCS World F-16C Viper pilot might be using his or her targeting pod to find and track a moving vehicle, while scanning the airspace in front of them for other aircraft with their radar, keeping an eye on the RWR scope for threat emitters, looking on the HUD to maintain airspeed, altitude, and heading, and looking outside the cockpit to ensure they won't run into a wingman. Fixating on or neglecting any one of these systems has the consequence of missing their target or floating to Earth beneath a digital parachute. I have found that this intense and diverse multitasking within DCS World preps prospective instrument rating trainees in real life for grasping the concept of an instrument scan very well, when the consequences of neglecting or fixating on instrument or system in a real aircraft are far more dire and far more permanent to your real life. And finally, we have communication, the lowest block on the tree of aviation safety of aviate, navigate, communicate, but still an absolutely essential skill for any pilot. This final part will probably apply to DCS World multiplayer fans more than those who partake only in single player, unfortunately. Learning to talk on the radio is one of the hardest aspects of initial flight training in real life, and is usually the skill that develops last as a pilot moves through their training. Funny enough, I also see communication as the last skill that really develops within the toolbox of a DCS World player as well. This is because it adds yet another layer on top of everything we have already talked about. We have to build and maintain our situational awareness picture. We have to fly the airplane, and we have to keep our instrument scan going and monitor all the systems of our aircraft. And then on top of that, we now also have to be listening to a flurry of nearly unintelligible jargon and reply quickly and concisely with our own jargon-laden reply. Talking on the radio can be one of the most intimidating parts of initial pilot training. And then once you pass your PPL check ride, and you think you've got it all figured out and you're on top of the world, you're thrown back into the deep end when it comes to all of the new radio communications you're introduced to in your instrument rating training. Communicating on the radio is where my two DCS World player students really separated. The one student that was an avid and competitive DCS World multiplayer fan knew how to talk on the radios practically right away, and jumped into making radio transmissions on only his second flight. While his radio usage definitely needed some work, that special radio tone and cadence was already present in his voice, and it was very funny, and we had a lot of laughs when he sounded awesome on the radios, but the words coming out were slightly incorrect as we worked to smooth out the rough edges. He was also able to come into his flight training already well versed in radio communication within the aviation environment because in DCS, as opposed to Microsoft Flight Simulator, talking on the radios has a consequence. Missing your call sign and the flurry of radio transmissions from a human-controlled AWACS, slinging bullseye and bra calls to multiple flights of multiple jets, means you've lost that chance to down a MiG, or worse, you'll find yourself floating under a digital parachute after that MiG gets through and shoots you down due to the missing of a warning from the AIC. In the end, guys, DCS World is a fantastic product and wonderful game that we all love, and can be a great way for prospective pilots to be introduced to the mental skills required of you to get your initial ratings and certs. When it comes to your home flight simulators, it doesn't matter what you fly in them. Your instructor will teach you the right way to operate the particular aircraft you're training in. It has been my experience that those who dig very deep into Microsoft Flight Simulator flying Piper Cherokees or Cessna 172s tend to develop some expectation bias of how their training should go or how to operate said aircraft, and tend to struggle a bit when it comes to real-life flight training. And while Microsoft Flight Simulator does have VATSIM, there really are no consequences for missing a radio call or talking back to a controller. In DCS, the consequence is your digital death or missing an opportunity to do the most fun thing that DCS has to offer, which is shooting down a MiG, of course. And while my sample size is limited here, I still think my case is rather compelling, and I find that the combat part of Digital Combat Simulator is what creates the situations with the stakes and consequences for a player that lead to the development of these skills that we have talked about today. This, coupled with the superior flight modeling and physics of DCS World aircraft, work to, at least in my opinion, make DCS World the far superior option for prospective real-life pilots. So, if you guys enjoyed this video, a like and a subscribe is definitely appreciated, and we'll see you in the next one. Please fly safe out there, guys, and enjoy this beautiful game.